This is Making Better Decisions. I'm your host, Ryan Sullivan. Decisions are where rubber meets the road for organizations. Each week, we'll be learning from people who are on the front lines of turning raw data into better outcomes for their organizations. This show is sponsored by Canopy Analytic, helping companies make better decisions using data. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Today's guest is an experienced business analyst with a focus on business intelligence and data analytics. He's spent multiple years in both consulting and developer capacities, helping companies across the United States perform data tasks such as data warehousing, integration, visualization, and even dabbling into some advanced analytics. He's Microsoft certified in Power BI and Azure Data Fundamentals. Senior Associate BI Analyst at Cerity Partners. Please welcome Brady Crawford. Thanks for joining, Brady. Glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Pleasure to be here, and love this podcast. It's super helpful. I was telling you the other day, but I think it's really, really good for somebody in our position to be going and listening to stuff like this, because I think there's always more to learn from others in the industry. So appreciate what you do here.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that. I think one of the things that's been fun to me is as I've, in my formative years as a developer and a consultant, I was consuming a lot of, more or less like how-to content, and that got increasingly more complicated. And I was reading like all sorts of like, crazy books and tutorials and like always on the cutting edge of the tech. But one of the things that, I've definitely found is that some of the strategic side of those conversations, kind of more of like the why are we doing this, has become a lot more valuable to me these days. And it seems like there's a market of people that want to, consume that information as much as they want to consume some of the how-to information. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyways, one of the kind of standbys for this podcast, one of the things that we like to keep static is our initial question, and then things kind of go off in their own direction from there. So I'll ask you the same question that I start everybody off with. What is the one thing you wish more people knew about using data to make better decisions?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of different answers you could give. I think in my own personal experience, I would say that trust and relationship building are key pillars to building a successful data culture, whether that be at your business, wherever it may be. I think, especially in developer roles or consulting roles, we'll get into the technicalities of everything and get really entrenched in the tools that we're using and entrenched in just getting from A to B, but we don't always ask why. So I think that's really critical, trust and relationship building with colleagues, with clients, whatever your role may be. That is super critical, because in talking to people, you get to better understand them, what their role is in the organization, and what they're trying to do. And the more we can get to the why, we less focus on the what and the how, and the why helps drive us in the what and the how and how we get there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of, it feels fairly obvious in the consulting space, sure, like consulting, particularly tech consulting, has this kind of information asymmetry. It's a lot like, somebody going to like a car mechanic or to like, get something, you know what I mean? Like if you don't really understand cars and this person tells you it's going to cost $5,000 to get your car fixed, you're just kind of like, will it? Because they have information you don't have. And it's kind of the same thing in our line of work, right? Like we understand this technology really, really well. And when you're working with other people, you tell them how long something's going to take or it's going to cost, or, that's an easy ask, that's a complicated ask, you don't actually want to do it that way until you've developed some of that trust and rapport and, things like that. It's tough for somebody to know, how best to work with you. And I definitely found that there were times where, you build something for somebody, they see that it's great, they run into the same problem that you warned them about, and then they're like, oh, okay, so then the next time you're like, you don't really want to do that. They're like, okay, I won't do it. And, that gets built over time. One of the things that you mentioned, you said, you talked about trust and relationship building being critical to make a good data culture. What is, a lot of us talk about this. What does data culture mean to you?
Oh yeah. I think data culture is something that frankly, that organizations either have or they don't. And I think it really speaks to how the business operates and how it makes decisions, really. So to me, data culture is all about uh, multiple different steps. I think from the beginning, it has to be leadership commitment. So from the top of the business, your leaders have to be committed to using data. And what that means is investing in it, right? So investing in the right resources, but also investing in the right people and making sure that they align with the firm and the overall clear vision and strategy that you're laying out for what data is going to speak to. And in that, then you take that strategy and that vision. And then I think that's where relationship building and then data literacy comes into play. Because once you come in here and again, you sit down, you can get really technical, but I think it's important to take it to the high level to people that aren't always dug into the data like we are at a row level, going field by field, looking at something, and then helping them to understand what we're trying to measure, what they're trying to measure, and how we can piece that data together, and then really set out and document, here's what this field is going to represent in your data. Here's what this KPI is trying to measure. Here's why we're trying to measure it, and making sure there's alignment there. And that's where the relationship building is really important, because you're going to work with different personality types. There's going to be people that are super data minded, focused, love digging in row by row. And then you'll work with other people that aren't that interested in digging into row by row. Like, I just want a high level of what my business, what my piece of the firm is doing. And, what am I doing well? What are we not doing well? So we can work on improving that. And I think with that comes data governance, because that creates the accountability factor. So whenever you're working with those people and building those relationships and working through data, then you can get into, okay, how do we make sure that we build processes and build different things in place to make sure that we're capturing this data appropriately and continually doing it the same way, making sure it's consistent to improve not just overall data quality, but the decisions that we're making, because the better the data, the better the decisions at the end of the day. And
hopefully.
Yeah, right. Hopefully. And so, yeah, that's the thing. I think, I know I talked about multiple different pieces there, but to me, that relationship building is the key of it all, because as soon as you get that commitment from leadership, you get your vision and your strategy of what your data is going to look like and how you're going to use it, then it's really BI analyst role, whoever it may be in that organization, to say, okay, even managers, like, let's emphasize what this data means. Let's make people accountable for what we're using this data for, and make sure that we continue to consistently use it across the base. And fortunately, myself, I've been in a great role with Cerity Partners, where data is everything to us. We have leadership commitment across the organization, and we're continuing to invest in that. And, they understand the importance, and it shows in the day-to-day, because we're constantly growing, constantly making decisions that are improving the firm. And in my past experiences, I've seen companies that did that well and companies that didn't do it well, and companies that are trying to figure out, what does it take to get there? And I think those are the key steps. And I think it's maybe a little bit easier than most think, but you have to get buy-in. That buy-in is so important, that everybody understands the importance of it. You create that accountability, continually improve it, and then document it. Document what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it. And then as you gain new colleagues, you continue to emphasize that, or gain new clients, you continue to emphasize that.
Yeah. I like that. I mean, I think that one of the things that I've found over the years, having worked with, a lot of different companies, big and small, is, you're absolutely right about the buy-in, right? It's critical. If, the things that we're doing are just kind of like every month having to fight for their life, then you're kind of in the situation where what is most easy to measure is what gets measured and considered successful. And that's not necessarily the stuff that leads to the best business performance. So one of the things that I've found on that buy-in front is that, at least to me, buy-in means like a fundamental agreement that the use of information will improve all areas of the business. Because if you believe in that, then you say, oh, well, like what's the ROI of this particular like data set? And you're like, well, I don't know, but like somebody in operations will eventually have a question, and that change, that's where you'll see the ROI, but it's not really predictable. It's a lot like the saying that, people have for marketing that's actually been mentioned on the pod here, right? Like people know that marketing works. They just don't know which half of the marketing that they're doing is the part that's working. And my thing is that, obviously, data person says invest in data regardless of ROI. Like I don't mean that, right? Like obviously like it's a balancing act. I'm actually not someone who thinks you should just go off and spend $1 million on building a data warehouse before you build your first report. Like, no. Like let's start doing simple well, and gradually, as you said, that mindset of just start and do continuous improvement. But I do kind of see every once in a while, like, business pressures are reality, but to the extent, that we can focus on, like longer term investment in providing resources to people as opposed to like a singular product, like a single report. I've seen that work much better. Now, one of the things, that you've touched on is relationship building a couple of times. And, I remember kind of being, fresh in this space and just kind of like, something like that, like makes sense to me. Like I could vibe that like, hey, these people are trying to buy on trust. Like, how do I build that trust? And like, really the only answer I ever had was just do like really solid work and work crazy hours and everybody will like you. And over time, I've realized that like there's a little more to it than that. So I wanted to see if I could get your take. Like, what are some of, the action steps, thought patterns that you might pass on to someone as far as how to start building some of those good relationships?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, especially early on in my career too in consulting, I think that was the way that I thought it had to be done. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I've found that, like you said, there's a lot more to that. Obviously, the more you work, the harder you work on something for somebody, they're more inclined to like you. But uh, thankfully, but in my experience now, for me, it is all about getting to know that person. What is their
Mm-hmm.
role? Why are they in that role? And figuring out really more about them on a personal level, even personality traits to know, are they more introverted or extroverted? Talking about, are they more of the finite, analytical row by row, or are they more of the high level thinker? And the way I really do that is like before I try to dive into any project, I really try to get to know business leaders before a project even comes to me. In a developer role, I have the opportunity to do that, knowing who our business leaders are and try to make an effort to make that connection to talk, even if it's not about data itself, just talking about day to day lifestyle, what our roles look like, what we're doing on a day to day. Because I think not only are you developing that relationship on a personal level, but you're also learning about their role and, the different things that they're really focused on. They tell you without you actually having to go ask, like, what are you doing and why is it important to you? Because I think that's a little bit more like, on the spot type question where they're afraid to answer. If you just get to know them, they're going to naturally talk about those things that are important to them, naturally talk about what their goals are for not just themselves, but the people that are under them, the people that are working around them. And then once you do get into a project, how much easier is it, when you step into that room with that person and you've already developed that relationship and you can talk about, you know,
Yeah.
here's what we're trying to track. Here's why we're trying to track it. How do we get there? And why are we doing what we're doing? And all those questions become far, far easier. For me, that first step in a project with business requirement documentation of saying, here's the list of things that we're going to try to tackle in this report. That meeting gets cut in half because we're already sort of on the same wavelength as far as what they're looking for. So I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, make an effort to try to, if you're in a developer role, make an effort to reach out to the people that are going to be leading and that you'd be building reports for. I think consulting, it's sort of the same. You don't have as many opportunities with a client to go
Yep.
out there, but you definitely still have the opportunity to get to know that client on a personal level and
Yeah.
understand why they do what they do.
Yeah. I absolutely love that. It's so funny. whether it's, some of the stuff that we're making here on the podcast or like content that I go out and consume and all of these places, it's funny the answer to like how many questions is just, yeah, just like craft like a real human being positive relationship, right? Like get to know that person,
Yeah.
and it's like everyone's like, "Oh my God, that's me." It's like, "Oh yeah,
Right.
just like yeah, talk to people, get to know them." Like
Yeah.
everything works way better when you're
Don't
friends
be
with
an
people.
AI robot, anything like that. Just be
Yeah.
yourself. Yeah. Be a person.
Yeah, exactly. So like one of the things that I found is obviously, being in a very kind of technical computer empowered role, it's very, very easy to be remote with a lot of this stuff. And one of the things that I found is that the remote environment, though totally fine and workable, um, it does kind of lend itself to like send request, human on the other end of the computer works on request, send the request back. And, there's like, it's something that, I try to battle against, like creating like tighter cycles where we're like communicating more often throughout the process so that it's not just like big, long development spurts and the person doesn't know where things are at. Another thing that I found again with that remote thing is just getting the opportunity to try and, meet in person, even if, like you said, you don't get that many opportunities, but like every time you get the chance to just say like, "Hey, you're in town, like let's get a cup of coffee or a bite or whatever." I've found that, you end up talking about all sorts of stuff and it's just much more comfortable.
Yeah.
So I think that that's great advice, just kind of like the human element. It's amazing, you know, how
Yeah.
it's everywhere.
That's a great point too. And I think, remote work obviously is ever since COVID has really taken off. And, with Legacy Argy before we merged with Cerity Partners, we were pretty much in office majority of the time, but now Cerity Partners is east to west coast, and so on an operational level from where I'm at in the organization, I'm helping clients from east to west. I'm helping clients in San Francisco. I'm helping clients in New York or Chicago with certain reports. And the point you made was great because I was talking to my boss, Connor, about this, but we went to Chicago last year to get in person. First time I met some of my teammates from there and also our COO and some of the other leadership team and talked about just face to face, having dinner, talking to each other, getting to know each other. And I felt like
Yeah.
leaving there for some reason, even though you're in it every day and you're getting that, process of what we're trying to do, why we're doing it. I felt like leaving there, I had more energy or like my mind was more settled because I'd had that opportunity to connect with them personally. And I've been like, okay, like we're on the same wavelength now. We know what we're trying to do. And I think it leaves you wanting more of that. And I think it's the same way on the other side, right? Like the client or that person, they want to work with you more. They want to get to know you more. And again, all of that leads to successful building down the line.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, one one other thing that I found that I'm kind of curious to know. I mean, I know that, you know, now with Cerity, you're kind of like a little bit more focused on financial stuff. And I actually want to circle over to that in a moment. But um, one of the things I found with consulting is it's, in general, like data concepts are pretty much always the same. Like people are like, oh, well, what type of data? And I'm just kind of like, like it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
However, from like a trust standpoint and like getting to build relationships, like at this point in my career, like most major industries, departments, functions, like I've at least touched like one thing in the past related to that. But one of the things that I found was like somebody, you're coming in to meet someone. It's like, hey, like I did some research on your company ahead of time, like prior to coming, whether it's, a meeting with an individual or, going to talk to a client, like having looked up that person on LinkedIn, having like checked out their company's website, like if it's an industry that I'm not familiar with, like have I made myself at least familiar with like, okay, like what do you actually sell? Like what are some, of the terms? What are the types of quantities that you care about? And like getting to have those conversations with people, it shows that like, okay, like they're smart, but they also, are willing to invest, which again, like it goes to that personal relationship stuff that you've been talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. LinkedIn was a game changer, I think for sure. Just in that space, because that gives you all if you're in consulting, like use LinkedIn to your advantage. That was
Yeah.
absolutely a great tool to get to know a client, to see what they're working on, what their company's tied to. For sure. That's a great point.
Yeah. So, like I said, I want to transition and learn a little bit about analytics within the financial space. So I was wondering, can you take a few minutes and tell us kind of like at a really high level, like what type of analytics work you're doing right now?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So once we came in, so I was originally with Argy Financial Group. We merged with Cerity Partners at the end of 2021, 2022. Uh,
Hmm.
Time goes by fast.
Yeah.
But once we merged with them, so with Argy, I was really focused on the Power BI space. I had that background in consulting of data warehousing, helping firms when I did that build their data warehouse and then get to the point where you could report in Power BI.
Hmm.
Argy, we were more focused on building those reports just straight out of a dynamic CRM. We didn't have a data warehouse. We hadn't got to that point yet. Um, and so once we merged with Cerity Partners, uh, Connor Powell, myself, my boss, moved into a room with the finance team and with Will Johnson and data engineering team and Reggie Hopton, who was there initially to talk about, what's the goal? Like what we're talking about here.
Mm.
What's the goal? What are we trying to achieve? Why are we trying to achieve it? And they were in the process of building a data warehouse. And so, uh, just like consulting, when you get dropped into that, it's a whole new ball game. Yeah. So really the first 6 months, I would say, or so, it was all about learning how our data warehouse functioned and really just running SQL queries, getting comfortable with the data. So what the softwares that we use Python to pull scripts from our APIs or our portfolio management systems for where we manage assets from different custodians, and then as well as Salesforce. So we use Salesforce CRM. And then Will and Tim Hunt, who worked with us at RU Financial Group now, is on the data engineering team with Cerity. They work together and they do phenomenal work. I mean, they're the ones that really do that back end lifting of, pulling that data and getting it using Meltano to do the ETL processes. And then we use data lakes. And then from that, we then build data marts. And so using those data marts, that's what we use for our reporting. And really our reporting is pretty mainstreamed right now. I mean, we're focused on identifying client activity, so new clients, lost clients, and the different pillars
Hmm.
of our business. We're tracking, our assets, our market return, and then also, just common business uh, KPIs such as revenue and things of that nature. And so we are centralizing everything in that data warehouse and again, building the firm's trust in that. So working with market leaders, working with everybody,
Yeah.
and then using it for day to day. I mean, the goal is to make it a one-stop shop and make things easier, things that should not be difficult, make it easy. So whether that be our ADV reporting or whether it be we're trying to report something to our board, that's our goal in life. I think every business intelligence person, consultant can say, like, we want to make things easier. And
Yeah.
Will Johnson always says it. He's like, if you can dream it, we can build it. But he can build it a lot better than I can. So I'll give him credit on that. But it's the sky's the limit in that. And so that's really the main goal right now. And then we are building Power BI reports, and we have growth reports for all of our pillar leaders. So working with them to identify how they want to track opportunities, how they want to track leads within their different sectors of the business, and then try to tie that together to not only what the firm goals are, but where we want to be. We're a constantly growing firm, so I'd say that's the biggest challenge for all of us at
Yeah.
Cerity Partners is, we're constantly merging in new firms and welcoming colleagues to grow with us. And with that, you're going to have different systems, different people. You got different locations, different styles, and it's challenging, but it's fun too. I at Argy, what I always say is I feel like at Argy, for some reason, I was like able to stay a step ahead. At Cerity Partners, it seems like I'm usually a step behind, but I don't view that as a bad thing. I think it's actually rewarding because you're constantly being thrown new things and new challenges that you have to think through. And,
Yeah.
sometimes they're a headache, but at the end of the day, like once you solve that thing, it's like, okay, like this is amazing what we're able to do. We're managing a massive RA firm, and centralizing all this data in one place for us to report on. And there's not a lot of firms that are able to say that. And that's why I'm so happy where I'm at, because like I said, they just invest in the right people. They invest in the right systems, and there's commitment. We have a lot of really, really great people and a lot of really good seats in our firm, and
Yeah.
and across the leadership. And I think without that, I don't know if Cerity Partners would be where it is today. So,
Yeah. Well, that's awesome and very exciting to hear. I mean, I think one of the things, this obviously saying, like the financial sector, that means that's a lot. It's like a really, really big section of the
yeah,
economy. But, if I can be so bold from my experience as to say that, like, in general, the financial sector, from a technological adoption standpoint, I would say kind of like lags behind other industries. Now,
absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
in fairness, I think that this makes a lot of sense, right? Like there are certain places, like if I make widgets and I do some sort of like cool tech adoption and that shows me how I can make them for 2% less cost. Okay, well that matters. Whereas if I do a bunch of like cutting edge financial reporting, I don't know how much like the return on investment is. Whereas if I get that number wrong, like for example, like, oh yeah, we put together this new report, and it goes out to the clients and they're like, what? This is half of my actual assets under management. It's like, okay, yeah, so like
Right.
messing with other people's money or their perception of their money is something that, everybody's very cautious around. So I think that caution has caused, a higher focus on kind of stability, predictability, reliability, and like less of a focus on some of the cutting edge stuff. And what was cool was that like all of the things that you mentioned to me were areas where, some of that risk isn't there, but you're able to reap some of those returns, right? Like looking at things like, client retention and all that stuff. Tell me a little bit about what it's like working in the financial sector where there is this kind of like caution. I think duly so, but
Yeah.
there is this caution. How are you guys, doing such a good job of moving forward? And, I'd have to say, I think beating at least some of your peers by doing that.
Yeah, for sure. For me, it's tied to the data governance space. I think that we
Mm,
do, of anywhere I've ever seen or experienced, we do such a great job of constantly monitoring and thinking about processes that we have in place and seeing where there's gaps. And where there's
mm,
gaps, we instantly try to, okay, let's develop a game plan. What part of the organization does this touch? Which teams does this touch? How do we get them to, lay out a simple standardized process of here's how we're going to do this. We use Confluence a bunch, which you may or may not have heard of, documentation tool. And it's a full resource of those types of processes and procedures, but also things like our data warehouse. How does our data warehouse function? And give a high level overview for anybody in the firm that needs to go in and read about that. And I think also, again, talking about our investing, we began Cerity Partners University, which is located in our Louisville office, and we're completely renovating that office. And we're bringing in all of our new colleagues, the next generation of advisors, to learn not just financial advising, but learn the pieces that like myself, compliance, accounting, billing, do on a day to day. And like, here's our process and here's what you have to do to ensure success and to ensure that we get things right. Because you're absolutely right. It's a lot more sensitive. And I think trust is harder to build in the financial services sector because on our level, whenever we deliver reports, I can build the most beautiful, perfect, awesome Power BI report. But if they see that one net cash flow for a client be off by $8 million or something, that would be a red flag. And then instantly, I sort of view it as like a three strike policy. Like, first time, okay, he's working through it. Second time, starting to lose trust. And then third time, it's like, it's really hard to get that back. And
yeah.
so that's the emphasis on the data warehouse. And that's why I think we're doing so well is because we're so focused and drenched on getting the processes and everything down and thinking of every last niche that could cause a number to look wrong or not look right, and making sure that we emphasize that with the teams. And then once we report on it, it's more like digging through a needle in a haystack if we have an issue, which is how you want it to be. If you want it to be as close to perfect, with also realizing it can never be perfect, right? And I think that's another thing that firms struggle with, and especially like C-suite. I think any C-suite, obviously you want your hands on perfect, timely data, and getting to that perfect mark, you can't get all the way there, but you can get pretty dang close. And so that's kind of the way I think we've approached it and done a really good job of managing it and just documenting what we do and, how we do it.
Yeah, that's incredible. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, like, data governance is a really viable answer. I mean, I think it's also kind of one of those things, in my personal opinion, that's it's hard to strike the right balance with. Sometimes, like, you'll go on this like governance initiative and it just kind of like grinds any development to a standstill because there's just like so many levels of like approval, and you have to write 15 documents for like a measure change or something. You know what I mean? It just like it also sounds like, one of the things that you guys are doing that really makes that work is like that academy that you were talking about, where we're like training everybody and investing the time and the effort into making sure that everybody understands, here's what we have, here's how you access it, here's what you're allowed to see, here's what, all of that stuff. That sounds to me like a really, really good recipe for, to kind of bring it full circle to make that data culture that you're talking about. It involves like a lot of engagement, a lot of training, and it sounds like you guys are having a lot of success with that, which is very cool. Excited to see where things go for y'all.
For sure. Yeah. It speaks to the growth and everything that we're doing. So it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So one of the things that, it's funny, we spent a good chunk of the day talking about, the personal side of things and getting to build relationships with people. I'm also a big believer in that. So I like to give everybody who's listening the opportunity to get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. Like, tell me a little bit about Brady. Like, what do you like to do outside of work? What's fun? All that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm from Kentucky, born and raised. Lived here my whole life. Met my wife here. My whole family's here. So, been with my wife for about 8 years. Been married about 3. Expecting a baby in January, so that'll be
that's wonderful. Congrats.
Thanks. So more excitement there. That's a whole new challenge for me. I got a lot more to learn. Hopefully, there's some documentation and confluence on that. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I've lived here, and outside of work, I mean, that really is my everything. I love hanging out with family. I've got a huge family on my mom and my dad's side. Love spending time with them. Have one little nephew already, 2 older brothers that live in Louisville, and see them quite a bit, and hang out with my wife's family as well and her siblings. I big sports guy, big Kentucky Wildcat fan. No shocker there. Sorry, Louisville fans.
Well,
but
yeah, I was gonna say you could go one of 2 ways on that front.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Either way, you're gonna make everybody angry.
For sure, yeah. So, big Wildcat fan, and also, NFL. I'm a big Patriots fan, so that typically makes people mad too. So,
how'd you end up a Pats fan?
Well, it completely coincidence. So I tell people that, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, your parents named you after Tom Brady," and it's like, no, my parents didn't even watch sports before I was born.
Yeah.
None of my family was into sports until I got into it. But growing up, watching the TV, seeing him play, it's like, oh, that's awesome. My name's on the back of his jersey. It's like, so became a huge Tom Brady fan. I was like, from that point forward, I was a Pats fan. And even now, to where the misery is, if you're a Pats fan,
Yeah.
But, I think I've settled. They're not going to win another Super Bowl in my lifetime, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see, man. So I live in Boston Metro. I grew up in Rhode Island. I've been, Boston sports fan my whole life. And, growing up, like, we were bad.
Yeah.
The Pats. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? Like, between like the big 4 teams, like, we always had somebody who was like doing some sort of contention, which is great, but like the Red Sox, when I was growing up, were in the curse. They hadn't won anything since Babe Ruth. And then you had the Pats, who were like bad. like, I remember I wore a Bledsoe jersey in my hometown and people would heckle me. I was like, yo, he's yours too. Like, it's just our team. Like, well, yeah, you know, come on.
You had the Celtics, though. I mean,
yeah, 100%.
100%. And now you got the Celtics. Did you go to a parade the other day? I didn't know if.
No, unfortunately, you know how it is, man. I had to work, but no, you know, we did enjoy the games, and you know, the Bruins had a good run. You know, the Pats, we'll see. Might be a rough year, but you know, and then the Red Sox are overperforming. I would say I'm mostly a baseball guy nowadays, and you know, it's not. I think we got a chance, man. I like this team. It's it's a fun team to watch. I
watch them quite a bit. I don't have a problem with them or the Yankees. I know most people hate the Yankees. We're Reds fans for the most part in Kentucky. We don't have any pro sports teams in Kentucky, so we got to outsource a little bit there. So
that's right. That's right. Yeah. Although you guys have, like, I would argue, one of the best sports rivalries in the country, particularly for basketball.
The last 5 or 6 years hasn't been great, but you know, we got like coaches at both schools now. I think it'll be better. I know a lot of Kentucky fans, including myself, are kind of happy that Cal's moved on and start a new chapter and see what that looks like. So
yeah. Well, I could talk sports with you all day, so I'll move that along for any of the listeners that aren't sports fans.
Right.
But, anybody liked what you had to say, wants to reach out, connect with you, find out more about you or your company, what are the best ways to connect? How can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. My LinkedIn, you know, you can attach a link there. Happy to connect. I set up calls with people all the time that are just interested in talking about the day-to-day, whether you're a developer or a consultant. And I like to learn from other people too. So if you think there's something that you could teach me, I'd be more than happy to get on a call. But also, you can talk to us at Cerity Partners. Go to our website. There's some information and a contact link there for me as well. So, you know, happy to talk anytime to anybody that's interested, and you know, just talk about anything. Like I said, I think building the relationships is the first part, and analytics can always come after. So,
yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, Brady, I think one of the things that I've enjoyed so much about this episode is that we have had, you know, a lot of folks who've been in like a lot of different areas. And I think like your experience, it feels a little bit like home to me. It's very close to my own, like having done, you know, Power BI and analytics development, consulting, like a lot of really similar stuff. And I thought that you brought, I think like wisdom is the right word, like a level of just kind of, you know, it took me a long time to figure out that like just be friends with people and everything works out. Like that took me a longer time than I want to admit to figure out, you know what I mean? So like, you know, it seems like you have your feet underneath you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share some of your experience and some of your knowledge. And, you know, I thought that it was delivered really, really well. So thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Yeah, it's an honor for me to come on here and talk to you, and, you know, I know you have a ton of experience as well, and it's just fun to talk to somebody, like you said, that's got the same background. And I think we've been in the same realms at different times, but and we know the fun and also the challenges that comes with that. So I appreciate talking to you, and also appreciate you doing the podcast. Like I said, I think this is a great podcast for anybody in business intelligence, or just within a business trying to build a data culture. I think listening to stuff like this is huge. It gives you the information you need to help do that. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Brady. I appreciate that, man. You know, I also want to thank the audience. If you guys have learned anything or laughed or had a good time, you liked the episode, please make sure to tell a friend, give us a like, a subscribe, or a review, you know, a good one, I hope. Whatever, all that other call to action stuff, just, you know, share us, do something. Anyways, Brady, thank you so much again for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. And this has been another exciting episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Thanks for listening. That's a wrap for today's episode of Making Better Decisions. For show notes and more, visit makingbetterdecisions.live. A special thank you to our sponsor, Canopy Analytic. Canopy Analytic is a boutique consultancy focused on business intelligence and data engineering. They help companies make better decisions using data. For more information, visit canopyanalytic.com. There's a better way. Let's find it together and make better decisions. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next week. Peace.